xProfessor here from Rounding Some Corners, also on TikTok. And I've got some questions for you, starting with, do you want to do a drug? Okay. Do you want other people to think of you as doing a drug? Okay. Do you want other people to know about you doing a so-called drug? Okay. Probably the answer is not yes to any of those because I'm making drug out to be a creepy word. And that's my way of introducing what we're talking about in this video lecture as part of our video lecture series on marijuana as Doxa. In this video lecture, we're focusing on the use of that word drug in association with marijuana, to the point where marijuana ends up getting portrayed as a dangerous drug that needs to be regulated. Remember, Doxa is an area of knowledge that we assume to be true and intact. It gets developed over time, sometimes decades, because of powerful forces, economic, regulatory, people willingly going along with those forces, and many others. And that body of knowledge doesn't get questioned in terms of its premises and its conclusions. And that's what's happened to marijuana when it comes out as a dangerous drug. Only through critical examination of a doxa can you take it apart and reveal those falsities. And that's what we're doing. In this particular video lecture, we're focusing on drug used to describe marijuana. And we'll start with the problem of using that word, because it is not a word that rolls off of the tongue like poetry when you say it. Drug. Even saying it twice is unpleasant. Drug, drug. It's got two consonants to start it off, and it is not a word that makes us feel in control of our own speech when we say it, because we'd rather be saying pleasant words. And that is kind of a parallel with drugs, because they make you not in control of yourself either. So uttering that word is problematic right from the moment that it thuds off of your tongue. Let's go on now to deeper, bigger problems, starting with the two definitions of drug, because these two definitions sometimes get mixed up when marijuana is talked about. The first definition is innocuous. It's innocent enough. It's the denotative definition, or the definition you get from a textbook or from a dictionary. It's the most commonly understood definition. And when it comes to drug, all it's supposed to mean is any substance that you ingest that changes your physiology. Your physiology is your internal body workings. It could be your pulse. It could be your sweating. It could be your willingness to get up and move around versus sit still. It could be how you hang your head. All of that is physiology. So when you talk about marijuana as a drug, ideally, it could be considered any substance that you ingest that changes those basic parts of you, however you want to define that. But this definition also means that you could be riding a bike and accidentally swallow a moth, and you just took in a drug, because that moth is going to make you cough. Or you could be sitting in a field and you decide you're going to try eating a dandelion because you've heard other people of eating them, and you decide you're going to do it. That's a drug, because now your body's going to engage in digesting that dandelion. So drug as a term is a very innocent term. Unfortunately, though, for marijuana, it's often put in the second main definition of drug, and that's what I'd like to go to now. And this definition of drug is as a potentially abused substance that needs to be regulated, usually by a government. And furthermore, this substance is often a compound that is produced in a laboratory, even if that laboratory is in the middle of an Amazon jungle, but most commonly in a pharmaceutical laboratory. It's a compound or a collection of drugs and other substances, some of which are synthetic, all put together into a compressed pill or some kind of liquid. That's how most of these drugs, the regulated ones that are potentially abused because they may become addicted, are produced. When we talk about this category of drug, we can also break it down into two further categories, and those include illegal drugs and legal drugs. The illegal drugs are the ones that we are most afraid of as a society, probably because of what we hear about in the news and also because of our own experiences with others who have used them, or maybe people have personal experiences. Those are going to be the fentanyls, the cocaines, the heroines, the methamphetamines, to some the LSDs. There are others, of course. These are seen as highly addictive drugs, not so much LSDs, but the other ones, highly addictive drugs that even upon first use can lead to cravings, and then life is spiraling downhill. That's the perception of those drugs. And then there are the legal drugs. And those drugs are administered through a profit-making system, in most cases, administered by pharmacies. where you have to get a prescription from your doctor and then go to the pharmacy and get that prescription filled, and you take home the drug. And those drugs can range from OxyContin, a highly addictive opioid, to ephedrine, a stimulant that's used for allergies. You can tell it's a stimulant because it ends in INE. Those two drugs have very different effects and very different abuse potentials, but they are both regulated. When you talk about marijuana, unfortunately, it's thought about as all of these things depending on the circumstance. It's thought of as illegal in some circumstances. It's thought of as highly addictive. It can be thought of as needing to be regulated. And on top of that, you have the decades-long myth about marijuana that it is a gateway drug, that the first step to hard drug use begins with marijuana. Try marijuana, you'll be a heroin addict. Try marijuana, you'll be snorting coke. Well, I refer you to a study produced by the National Bureau of Economic Research in NORML. You can find it on the website, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, which disputes and disproves for once and for all that marijuana is a so-called gateway drug. And I won't even use the term drug to describe it here. It is not. Marijuana does not lead to heroin use. There is no increased incidences or relationship between the two because of that or any other so-called drug for that matter. Marijuana is a natural substance. Marijuana is a plant. This plant here is picked a little bit young, but the potency of marijuana comes mainly from the THC that is in the bud of the plant. But there are tons of other cannabinoids in the marijuana plant as well, including in the leaves, not so strong. So marijuana does not fit these categories. It is not in any of the things that we have discussed having to do with the use of that word drug. And that's why using drug and marijuana, even in the same sentence, is so problematic unless you're considering it to be just simply something that you ingest that can affect your physiology. But now I also want to mention those, what I consider to be most harmful drugs that were not even mentioned in the list that I gave earlier. I call these the most harmful drugs because they are buried in our culture to the extent that they are not even talked about as drugs in most circumstances. They are not regulated at all, or if they are, it's very little. And in many cases, we embrace them because of our cultural behavior in public. Let's get to the list. The fourth worst drug on the list, I believe, is nicotine. This drug ends in INE. It's a stimulant that's highly addictive. Many people liken it to heroin, to trying to kick it. It can be found in cigarettes and cigars, and you can get it at your local convenience store as soon as you turn 18, and usually before that because you're not often carded. Nicotine is highly addictive. It is celebrated in many ways through movies, and it is still available as a substance, but we all know the effects of cigarettes, at least almost everybody does, on the respiratory system and certainly on skin. So nicotine is number 4 on that list. Now let's go to the third one. This one's more controversial. It's something that most people are openly stating that they need every day, though they're not saying this word, in order to function. I'm talking about caffeine, and I'm talking about it in coffee, though it also exists in soda and, of course, energy drinks. Because caffeine is something that people openly say, I got to have my coffee to function. I haven't had my coffee. I can't think about that today. Or I've got a headache. I need a cup of coffee. That right there is evidence of an addiction. Coffee and the caffeine that goes with it is not just a drug, but it is a highly addictive drug to the extent that many people can't give it up. They need it just to function. The second most harmful, this one is also socially sanctioned to the extent that it is celebrated in our faces almost every single day. And yet some people would consider it to be the most harmful drug, even though I've got one more on the list. This one is none other than alcohol, which contains sugar, by the way. Alcohol is a substance that is so celebrated. You have only to go on social media and see so many people holding up their glasses as an example of how to celebrate a great event, or holding up their glasses as an example of their achievement in life at getting this job or going on vacation. And yet, how many people would say that they truly benefit from alcohol? Most people would say, I have a great time that night, but the next day, that's a different story. There's a hangover. There's the remembering what it is that I actually did. There's the fights that I got into that I wouldn't have got into if I hadn't have drunk alcohol. There's the expense. There's the extra weight that I put on my body. There's the slight nudging of my body the next day to have another drink to get rid of feeling a little bit less ourselves because of coming off of the alcohol from the night before. There's so many problems with alcohol. Not many people would say that alcohol is good. And I'm not saying that there are people out there who can't drink alcohol, that it's not really affecting them in seriously deleterious, harmful ways. I'm not saying that, but most people end up at a place with alcohol where they realize it's as much of a drug as anything out there and should be called so. It should be called so because of how addictive it is. But that doesn't speak to the most dangerous drug of all, in my opinion. And that is a drug that we cannot get away from unless you are super vigilant every single day in everything that you do. And even then, at the end of the day, you may end up taking it in when you brush your teeth, because that drug is none other than sugar. And sugar is in so many substances, and so many people need it to function, to get that stimulation, to get up for the day. They think it's taste. They think it's about the taste. But it's a lot about the stimulation that comes from sugar. And there are good sugars and bad sugars. I'm not going to get into that. Beet sugars and cane sugars and corn syrup sugars and all kinds of sugars. But sugar as a substance is every bit the dangerous drug that it should be called out for, because it is in almost everything that you buy in a can has sugar in it. Almost everything that you buy that is in a package has sugar in it. We have sugar in our coffee. We have sugar in our cereal. We have sugar in our salad dressing. And sugar, as I mentioned, is in our toothpaste, or at least many of them at the end of the day. And that doesn't speak to many other places where sugar is, and even people just saying, I need a candy bar. Sugar is really difficult to get away from. And the effects of it are absolutely harmful. I'm talking about the diabetes acceleration. I'm talking about the weight gain. I'm talking about the anxiety that results from coming off of sugar. I'm talking about the acne that results from sugar. So many problems with sugar, and it's so openly celebrated through advertisements and all the other methods that I talked about. All of these things that I've talked about today, they are so different from this little innocent plant that grows from the ground that people, unfortunately, when they refer to as drug, other people consider to be a dangerous drug that needs to be regulated. It does not. Marijuana is a healthy pleasure that with the right education can benefit most people. Marijuana, if you know it, you know, is a healthy pleasure, which also means that if you know, and once you know, you cannot unknow. Marijuana is a healthy pleasure.